Hi guys, it's Jess. Welcome back to my channel, and this is my July wrap up. So July was a pretty good month for me in terms of reading. I managed to read 7 books, which I am super happy with, considering that throughout most of 2020 I didn't read anything, and it's a great feeling to be back doing what I love and getting lost in books again. The first book that I picked up in July was The Silent Patient, and I have to say that I was pretty disappointed with this book. I remember when this book came out and there was so much hype surrounding it and everybody was loving it, and I thought I was going to be one of those people that gave this book 5 stars and absolutely adored it, but the way this book was marketed does not represent what this book was actually about. And going into it, I thought I was going to get a really suspenseful, really creepy psychological thriller, and it wasn't any of those things. This book follows the story of a woman named Alice whose husband was murdered in their house, and it seemed that she was the one that shot him. She didn't deny that she killed him. In fact, after his death, she didn't say a single word. She just went totally silent, and the court ruled her mentally unstable, so she was placed in a mental hospital to get treatment. We also follow this character who is a psychotherapist, I believe, and he comes across Alice's case, becomes really interested, and thinks that he is the one that might be able to help her. And the premise of this book sounded really intriguing, and I really liked the first half. I was really interested in Alice and I wanted to know loads more about her, and I was really interested in finding out what actually happened to her husband. But the last half of this book just threw me completely. I will admit it wasn't something that I was expecting, and I was surprised by it, but I don't think it was pulled off that well, and it follows the unreliable narrator trope without spoiling it too much for you, and that is a trope that I love. It's a trope that many people love, and when it's done well, it can be really effective, but in the case of this book, it just fell really flat. I think it ended really abruptly, and I felt like I had no closure whatsoever, and it just wasn't what I thought it was going to be. All of the marketing said it was going to be creepy and suspenseful and dark, and it wasn't that. So I ended up giving this book 3 stars. Some people might enjoy this, but for me it just wasn't the amazing thriller I was hoping it was going to be. So another book that I read, or rather listened to actually, was White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. So I have been trying to educate myself a little bit more on black issues and issues surrounding race, and in June, I listened to the audiobook for Why I Am No Longer Talking to White People About Race by Renee Edo-Lodge, and that was a really eye-opening listen for me, and White Fragility was no different. It was very fascinating, really eye-opening, and I'm really glad that I listened to this. Robin DiAngelo is an academic, and she specialises in racial studies and particularly white studies, and in this book she tries to point out a lot of things that white people do and say when they are confronted with being called out on things they do that might be considered racist, how they react and how they try and defend themselves, and it's a very truthful, very honest, sometimes very brutal book actually, but it's a very important one, and I think everyone that is white should definitely read this, because I recognised a lot of points that D'Angelo made in this book, not just in myself, but in people that I know. And it is very true that if us white people get called out on our racism, we do tend to get very defensive and try and make excuses for it. And she explains why that's not helpful and why we need to just accept that what we've done and what we've said is wrong and apologise and move on and do better to not make those mistakes again. And she draws upon experiences that she's had with students and people that she has taught and done workshops with, and how they have reacted to being called out. And she also draws upon experiences that her black friends and black colleagues and other black peers have experienced, and it's really, really eye-opening. And I definitely think everybody should give this book a listen, because wow, I learned a lot. I read Leviathan Wakes by James S.A. Corey, and this is a book that I have had sitting on my shelf for well over a year. My cousin gifted this to me last February, I believe, and it's a series that he really enjoyed, so he thought I might like it as well. And it's a political sci-fi set in the future where the human race has colonized the majority of the solar system. So there's a colony on Earth, but there's also a colony on the moon and on Mars and on like Saturn's moons as well. And within the asteroid belt, you know, there's a colony there. Like, the scope of this book and the world that it's set in is just massive, and it was hard to get my head around sometimes actually. But we follow these two main characters. One is called Captain Holden, and he is an ice hauler, and he and his team stumble across this wrecked ship on an asteroid, and it holds a secret on it that they probably shouldn't have encountered. And then we also follow this character who is a detective. He's called Miller, and he is trying to find out what happened to this girl, and he is trying to get her back from wherever she is, back to her parents, back to safety. And the two characters along the way meet and join forces, and there's a massive war that erupts within the solar system, and there's a lot of political conspiracies. And there's also something in this book that is very relevant to the world that we are living in right now, which really surprised me. I wasn't expecting it to pop up, but I also really loved it. And yeah, like, I don't know what I was expecting with this book going into it, but it definitely wasn't what it is. And what I will say about this book without spoiling it is that it is a very weird mix of genres. Obviously you have your sci-fi elements in it, but there's also a mystery element to it and a horror element to it. And I also got some film noir vibes with it as well. Like, it could easily be a black and white movie from the 40s and 50s, particularly with the main character Miller. He definitely reminded me of one of those old 50s films detectives, just because of the way he holds himself and the way he dresses. So that was really interesting, but it kind of worked. I mean, I liked it. What I will say about this book though is that it is very dense and a lot happens all at once, and there is so much information that you have to take in, and sometimes I did find it a little bit hard to follow. I did like the writing style. It was very straight to the point, but I did feel that sometimes there were some scenes that probably weren't needed, and I felt like some of the dialogue was a little bit too bland for my liking, and there were some moments that just weren't as exciting as they perhaps should have been, especially the battle scenes in this book. I didn't get that much excitement out of them, but maybe that's just me. Anyway, I gave this book 3 stars. I will definitely pick up the next book in the series, which is called Caliban's War, and I believe there's like 6 or 7 books in this series. I'm not sure, but yeah, this book was very enjoyable regardless, and I would definitely recommend it if you are into hard sci-fi. It's a lot of fun. So now we're moving on to the books that I read for the reading brush, and out of the 5 books that I picked for that readathon, I managed to finish 3 of them, which I am super happy with, and that seems to be my readathon average actually. And one of those books was The Beautiful by Renée Ahdieh, and this is a book that I have been anticipating to read for quite some time actually. It's a YA fantasy vampire novel, and we follow this girl called Celine who has fled her life from Paris, and she sets herself up in New Orleans. She joins a convent and she makes friends with some of the girls there, and along the way she meets this mysterious woman called Odette who asks her to make her dress for a ball, and she also meets this mysterious handsome guy called Sebastian who may not be what he seems, and she gets thrown into this other world, as they call it, of vampires and potentially magic and maybe some other things along the way as well. This book was a lot of fun. I really enjoyed the first half of this book. What I love about this book is the atmosphere, and I think Renée Ahdieh is a super talented writer in terms of creating a fantastic atmosphere. It was spooky, it was romantic, there was a lot of sexual tension in this book, which I was 100% here for, and I love the setting of New Orleans in general. I've seen that setting used quite a few times for supernatural books and it really works, and it was set in the French Quarter as well, so I really liked the inclusion of French culture and the French language. I really enjoyed that aspect of it. Where this book fell flat was the ending, and I was left feeling slightly disappointed by the way it ended. I wouldn't say I was confused, but it was definitely something that I wasn't expecting. Again, that's not a bad thing. I don't like things that are predictable, but I felt like the same with The Silent Patient. I felt like I didn't get any closure from it, and I felt like some of it just didn't make sense. I know there is another book that is out now carrying on the story, so I will probably get the answers that I'm searching for in that book, so I'm not going to jump the gun too much. I did enjoy the main character Celine. She was a very strong female protagonist. I absolutely loved her. She had such a great personality, but she wasn't perfect. She had her flaws, and I also really loved Sebastian as well. Again, he was another character that he probably came across as a bit more perfect, but deep down he had a lot of things going on that made him just a very unique character to read about, and I really, really enjoyed reading him. Yeah, so there was a lot of positives with this book, but it wasn't as good as I was hoping it would be. This was one of my 5-star predictions when I started this year, and unfortunately I ended up rating it 3 stars, which I'm sad about, but I have a lot of hope for the second book. Another book I read and completed for the reading rush was The Crossing Places by Ellie Griffiths, and this book really surprised me actually. This is a mystery and a thriller, and it's set in Norfolk, and we meet this character called... I've forgotten his name. 1 second. He's called Harry Nelson, so he's a detective and he finds some bones on a salt marsh in Norfolk, and they're child bones, and he has been leading this case to find this girl that has gone missing, and he suspects that these bones might be those of that girl, but he consults this archaeologist called Ruth, and she examines the bones and they turn out to be Bronze Age bones. So it's not the girl that he's looking for, but we follow the two characters as they are led on this mystery trying to find out what happened to this girl, and there turns out to be another girl that went missing 10 years prior, and there's a whole lot to do with archaeology and historical sites and the Bronze Age, and I just really enjoyed everything about this book. I loved the writing. It was really well written and really well paced, and I couldn't stop turning the pages. I was so keen to find out what was going on, and the twists and turns in this book actually were really surprising. I wasn't expecting it to end the way that it did, and I wasn't expecting some of the things that happened to happen, and I ended up giving this book 4 stars. I really, really liked it, and the atmosphere of Norfolk and the way that Ellie Griffiths wrote it as this haunting, grey but beautiful, vast expanse of land was just... like, oh my gosh, I loved it. So I would really recommend this if you want a really easy mystery thriller to read. It was so much fun. The last book that I completed for the reading rush was this one here, Combat Magics by Steve Cole. This is a Doctor Who novel, and I will be honest, I don't really remember what this book is about because I listened to the audiobook for this while I was out on a walk around Rutland Water. So when I'm walking, my mind tends to wander a lot, and I didn't take a lot of this book in. But this book follows the Doctor and her companions as they end up in Gaul in 451 AD, and this is a time where there is a battle going on between Attila the Hun and the crumbling Roman Empire, and both sides seem to be aided by these supernatural creatures, and the Doctor and Yaz become Attila the Hun's personal sorceresses because obviously they can do things that people would not have dreamed of doing back in those days, and the Doctor starts to learn the science behind what is actually going on with these creatures, and it's something that I would totally expect from a Doctor Who novel, and from what I did take in, I really enjoyed it. But like I said, when I'm walking, my mind tends to wander, so there is a lot of the book that I probably did miss because 1, I listened to it on 2 times speed, and 2, I was just absolutely entranced with my surroundings. They were so beautiful. So I will go back and re-listen to this book at another date because I want to get into more of the 13th Doctor novels, and I want to be able to just sit and enjoy this book at a slower speed and take more of it in and actually remember what it was about because yeah. Anyway, I gave this book 3 stars. I pretty much give every Doctor Who novel that I read 3 stars because they're never normally amazing, but they're always a lot of fun. The last book that I completed in July is The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown, and honestly, I am slightly disappointed with this. If you don't know, I did mention this in my Reading Rush vlog. The Da Vinci Code is one of my favourite films of all time. When I first watched that film as a teenager, I was absolutely obsessed with it. And I thought I was gonna love the book just as much, but it just didn't live up to the expectations that I had for it, and I definitely think the film is a lot better than the book. That's probably a controversial opinion, but this book is controversial anyway. So we follow this character called Robert Langdon, and he is a symbologist. I think that's the name for it. And he is also a university professor. He works for Harvard. So he's a pretty intelligent, pretty well-known guy, and he was in Paris doing this lecture when he gets roped into this murder investigation. This guy that he was supposed to be meeting, who works at the Louvre in Paris, was murdered in very mysterious circumstances, and when they attend the crime scene, the man is sprawled out naked on the gallery floor like Da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, and he's written a code in blood next to his body, and that code then ends up becoming the main theme of this story. And Langdon meets this woman called Sophie, and the two of them become fugitives because Langdon becomes the main suspect in this investigation, and they are trying to crack the code that this man left them. And it's all about Leonardo da Vinci and his associations with this society called the Priory of Sion, and there's also the inclusion of the Opus Dei, which was a real life organisation, and it's all about religion. And there's a lot going on in this book, and I know this book was banned in a few countries because of the things that it talks about, and it was very controversial. And I know the Catholic Church was very against the release of the film when it came out. So this book has a lot of weight to it, and it's all the things that interest me. I love things that are controversial because it opens my mind up to different kinds of discussions. And I'm not saying I believe everything in this book. It is very far-fetched, but at the same time, I was Googling everything and just learning copious amounts of stuff about the Catholic Church and Leonardo da Vinci and the Priory of Sion. And yeah, like, there is a lot going on, but the main thing that bugged me about this book was Dan Brown. I don't think his writing is that great, and I'll give you an example of some of the things that really bugged me in this book. So what he does is he will end a scene but then add another scene with sentences that start like this: 30 seconds later, 40 kilometres away. And then he will go 2 rooms away in the kitchen. Manservant Remy, blah, 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 whatever, okay? Here, he goes hundreds of miles to the south. A chartered Beechcraft Baron 58 raced... Like, I don't care. And then he goes 30 seconds later, Fash was packing up. Like, okay, and then 30 seconds later, 40 kilometres away. Another 40 kilometres away. Another 100 miles away. Like, shut the fuck up, okay? The exposition in this book is really not needed. And it felt like I was on a little bit of a history lesson. And don't get me wrong, I don't mind being on a history lesson in books every now and then. But Dan Brown does it to the extent that sometimes it annoyed me. And great, like I love learning new things, but I just want the story, and some of the things were not relevant to the story. His writing just made him sound smug, right? As I was reading this, I mean, having seen the film, I knew the story anyway, and it was hard not to compare the book to the film and associate it with the film. But reading this, it felt like he knew it was going to be a film, and it felt like he was just writing the script for the film. And I could just tell that he was smug as fuck when he was writing this. Like, he was trying really hard to be clever, and at some points it kind of fell a bit flat. It was lacking in atmosphere, it was lacking in tension, it was lacking in any decent character development, the dialogue was a little bit bland, and I just don't think his writing was worth the praise that this book seems to have. Yeah, so I ended up giving this 3 stars, which I am sad about because, again, I was hoping it was going to be a 5-star book for me, knowing how much I loved the film. But I'm sorry, Dan Brown, but your writing is just not up to... It's just not up to much these days. Having said that, I will read a few more Dan Brown books. I am willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, and I do have Inferno sitting on my shelf, and I am intrigued to read that because it's set in Florence, and that is a city that I absolutely adore. So I will give that one a go, and probably Angels and Demons, and if I am not enjoying those, then I will probably have to write Dan Brown off completely. Sorry. Alright guys, so that was my July wrap up, and I will admit that I am pretty sad that I didn't get any 5-star reads out of these books here, but August is looking like a good reading month for me, and I have a lot of books lined up that I am really excited about and am hoping to get to. Let me know in the comments down below if you've read any of the books that I have mentioned in this video and what your opinions on them are. Did you like any of these books, or did you hate any of these books? I would love to hear your opinions as always, and leave a cheeky thumbs up if you like this video. Please subscribe to my channel while you're at it, I would really appreciate it, and thank you so much for watching. I will see you all in another video very soon. Bye guys.